Okay, very good evening, my dear friends. Today's eminent resource person, Dr. P.MANJULA Madam Garu, Assistant Professor, Department of Botany, RBVRR Women's College, Autonomous, Hyderabad. Madam is going to explain about one of the important area of our plant biology, botany, that is plant ecology. So in this, Madam is explained, yesterday class, Madam has clearly explained about the hydrosphere and geosphere. So Madam, please continue that yesterday class and please proceed and share your screen.
Okay, thank you, sir. So today's topic is ecological adaptation, sir.
Madam, please click on slideshow.
1 minute, sir. Okay, so thank you, sir. So today's topic is ecological adaptation. So next topic, so this is also important topic, ecological adaptation. So ecological adaptation. So first one is the what is adaptation. So adaptation means that is any feature of an organism or its part, so which enables it to exist under the conditions of its habitat. It is called as the adaptation. That is to survive under some adverse conditions or to utilize the maximum, utilize the nutrients from the surrounding environment. So some changes in the changes in the organism will take place. So it may be morphological changes, or it may be physiological, or sometimes anatomical adaptations may takes place to adapt to particular environmental conditions. So it is called as the adaptation. Adaptation means so the change, that is a change in organism to survive under particular environmental conditions. So it is called as the adaptation. So adaptations it may be for to withstand the adverse conditions of the environment, or to utilize the maximum benefit of the environment, that is for the nutrition purpose or other purposes. So here the adaptations, it may be morphological adaptations, that is the changes in the external features of the organism, or it may be internal characters, or maybe physiological changes, or reproductive adaptation. So these are the mainly the adaptations. It may be morphological, external features, or internal or physiological functions, or other reproductive functions. So here first of all, the plants are classified into different types by warming. So based on the nature of the substratum, so warming in 1898, he classified into different types. So here the plants are classified into different types based on their nature of the substrate. So that is the plants which growing on different areas. So based on this, here the warming classified into different types. So first one is the axilophytes. So axilophytes means that is the plants which growing on the acid soil. So they are called as the axilophytes. Halophytes, another type is halophytes. So halophytes means the plants which growing on the saline condition, that is the salt condition. So they are called as the halophytes. Zamophytes. So zamophytes means the plants which growing on the sand. So they are called as the zamophytes. Lithophytes, another one is another type is plants that is lithophytes. So lithophytes means they're growing on the surface of the rocks. So they're called as the lithophytes. And chasmophytes. So chasmo means the plants which growing on the crevices of rocks. So they're called as the chasmophytes. So these are the different types of classification that is the plants are classified into different types based on their substratum where they are growing, and which so here warming classified into different types. First one is the axilophytes. Axilo means the plants which are growing on the acid soil. So they are called as the axilophytes. Halophytes. Halophytes means the plants which growing on the saline condition, that is salt. conditions. So they are called as halophytes. Zamophytes. Another term is zamophytes. So zamophytes means the plants which growing on the sand. So they are called as the zamophytes. Lithophytes. Lithophytes means the plants which growing on the surface of the rocks. Lithophytes. Zamo means so the plants which growing on the crevices of rocks. They are called as the. So here here we can observe that here they are growing on the in between these crevices, that is breaking of the rocks. So in between this, here they are growing. So here the lithophytes are on the rocks. Okay. Next one is a zamo on the sand. So they are called as the zamophytes. Halo means they are growing in the saline salt water. They are called as the halophytes. So again, here the plants are classified into different types based on water relation. So based on the water relation, the plants are classified into different types by warming. So first one is the hydrophytes. So hydrophytes means the plants growing in or near the water surface. So they are called as the hydrophytes. So the hydrophytes, they grow in near the water bodies or in the water bodies. So they are called as the hydrophytes. That is the plants which require water for their growth. So they are called as the hydrophytes. Next one is the xerophytes. Xerophytes means the plants adapt survive under the very poor availability of water. That is the plants which growing on the dry habitats. So they are called as the xerophytes. So xerophytes are further classified into many groups. Again, here the xerophytes are classified into different types. So based on the different substrata, dry area, so they are classified into different types. So next one is the mesophytes. So the mesophytes means so the plants growing in an environment so which is neither very dry or nor very wet. So it is usual, normal, moderate condition. So it is called as the mesophytes. So first one is the hydrophytes. So the hydrophytes means the plants which growing in or near the water body. So they are called as the hydrophytes. Xerophytes mean they are growing on the dry habitat. So they are called as the xerophytes. And mesophytes. Mesophytes means they require moderate conditions. That is not very hot or not very wet. So both water is required. So here the dry conditions also required. So moderate conditions are required for this mesophytes. So again here xerophytes are again classified into different types. So first one is the axilo. We already discussed about this. Axilo means the plants which growing on the acid soils. Halophytes. So halophytes means the plants growing on the saline soil. Lithophytes, the plants growing on the rocks. So here these all are dry conditions. So zamo, that is the plants growing on the sand and gravel. So they are called as the zamophytes. Chersophytes. So the plants growing on the wasteland. So they are called as the chersophytes. Eremiphytes. So the plants growing on the deserts. So they are called as the eremiphytes. Psychrophytes. Psychroplant, that is the plants growing on the cold soil. So low temperatures, the plants which growing on the low temperature. So they are called as a psychrophytes. Xylophytes, that is they growing on the savannas. And sclerophytes mean the plants growing on the forest and bushland. So they are called as the sclerophytes. So here xerophytes. So generally xerophytes mean they're growing on the dry habitats. Again these xerophytes again based on the substrata, again they are classified into different types. So these are the classification of plants based on the substratum and also based on the availability of water. So next topic is that is ecological adaptations of hydrophytes. So we already know about this hydrophytes and xerophytes. So what are the adaptations of hydrophytes? So hydrophytes means the plants which growing in the water. So they are called as the hydrophytes. So in Greek, hydro means water and phyton means plant. So the water plant, that is the plants which growing in the water. So they are called as the hydrophytes. So the plants growing in the wet places are near water bodies. So examples for hydrophytes are here Utricularia, Vallisneria, Hydrilla, Cara, Keratophyllum and Trappa. So these are the examples for hydrophytes. So generally the factor, so for the adaptations to these environmental conditions also, so the growth of the plants also affected by the temperature of the water. So generally here, generally the plants which growing in the water, they are called as the hydrophytes. But here also, due to some changes in the water, so some plants they grow in low temperatures, so some plants they grow in high temperature. So here this also affects the growth of the plants. So generally the growth of the plants will affected by temperature of the water, osmotic concentration of the water, toxicity of the water, flow of water, and dissolved oxygen in the water, and also nutrients in the water. So if there is no nutrients are available in the water, so the plants, some plants they cannot survive. So dissolved oxygen also required for the growth of the plants. So these are the factors which affecting the growth of the aquatic plants. So next one is the classification of hydrophytes. So here the hydrophytes are classified into different types. So based on the relation to water and air. So they are submerged hydrophytes, floating hydrophytes, amphibious hydrophytes. So first one is a submerged. So here the hydrophytes are classified into different types. So based on the relation to the water and air. So that is the plants which grow inside the water. So they are called as the submerged hydrophytes. Floating means the roots are float inside the water, that is fixed inside the water, but the leaves are float and the stem and leaves are float on the surface of the water. So they are called as a floating. Here it is connected with both air and water. Amphibious. So here also in amphibious also, here the roots are fixed in the water, but the stem and leaves are exposed to outside. So they are called as amphibious hydrophytes. So here the hydrophytes are classified into different types. So first one is the submerged hydrophytes. Second one is the floating hydrophytes, and third one is the amphibious hydrophytes. So first one, that is submerged hydrophytes. So submerged hydrophytes means the plants grow below the water surface. So they are called as a submerged hydrophyte. That is, the plant they are present inside the water only, and they are not in direct contact with the air. So there may be. So here again, this submerged hydrophytes, they are again classified into rooted submerged or free floating submerged. So here submerged hydrophytes, again they are classified. So submerged means they are present inside the water. There is no direct contact with the air. Again, this submerged hydrophytes, they are again classified into rooted submerged and free floating submerged. So first one is the rooted submerged hydrophytes. So rooted submerged hydrophytes means, so here the submerged hydrophytes, they contain the roots. So they are called as the rooted submerged hydrophytes. So examples for rooted submerged hydrophytes are Vallisneria, Hydrilla, and Potamogeton. Next one is the free floating submerged hydrophytes. So here they do not contain roots. So they freely floating on the surface, freely floating in the water. So examples for this is Utricularia and Keratophyllum. So second one is the floating hydrophytes. So that is the plants float on the surface of the water. Okay, so the plants float on the surface of the water, and plants contact with both air and water. So it may be or may not be rooted. So here the floating hydrophytes means the plants which are float on the surface of the water. So they are called as the floating hydrophytes. So here the plants, they will contact with both air and water. So it may be or may not be rooted. So here the floating hydrophytes, they may contain the roots, or it may be roots are absent. So again, based on this, again they are classified into two types. So that is free floating hydrophytes, that is non-rooted. So here the roots are absent. Examples for free floating hydrophytes are free floating non-rooted hydrophytes are Wolffia microscopia. So whereas scopica, whereas the free floating but rooted hydrophytes. So here these are the floating hydrophytes, but they contain the roots. So they are called as a floating but rooted hydrophytes. So rooted in the soil, So here they are rooted in the soil, and examples for this floating but rooted hydrophytes are Nymphia, Nelumbium, and Victoria. So these are the examples for floating but rooted. So here the root system is developed and they are floating in the water. So again, third one is the amphibious hydrophytes. So amphibious hydrophytes means the plants adapted to both aquatic and also terrestrial mode of life. So they are called as the amphibious. So they can grow in both water and also on the land. So they are called as the amphibious hydrophytes. So they grow either on shallow water or muddy soil. So generally they grow in shallow water. So that is on the surface near the water body. So they generally they grow near the water body. So examples for this is Oryza sativa, Marsilia, and Sagittaria. So these are the examples for amphibious hydrophytes. So marsh plants, that is shoot completely exposed to air, but roots are completely buried in the soil. So the root system is completely buried inside the soil, but the shoot system is exposed outside. So they are called as a marsh plants. So these are the examples for amphibious hydrophytes. So here the amphibious hydrophytes means that is they can adapt it to the plants adapted to grow in both the aquatic and also the as a terrestrial mode. So they are called as the amphibious. So in amphibious, generally that is shoot is completely exposed to air, but shoots roots are completely buried in the soil. So examples for this is marsh plants is Cyperus and Typha. For amphibious hydrophytes, Oryza sativa, Marsilia, and Sagittaria. So these are the examples for amphibious hydrophytes. So next one is the adaptation. So in that is in previous one is that is the classification of hydrophytes based on the relation with water and air. So first one is submerged hydrophytes, second one is floating hydrophytes, and third one is amphibious hydrophytes. So first one is the submerged hydrophytes. So submerged hydrophytes means the plants which grow below the water surface and they are not in direct contact with the air. So they are the submerged. So here again submerged hydrophytes are classified into rooted submerged hydrophytes and free floating submerged hydrophytes. So examples for rooted submerged are Vallisneria, Hydrilla, Potamogeton, etc. And free floating submerged hydrophytes are Utricularia, Keratophyllum. So for the second one, that is floating hydrophytes. So examples for floating hydrophytes are that is again here the free floating hydrophytes, again they are the rooted floating and non-rooted. So examples for non-rooted floating hydrophytes are Wolffia, Microscopia, whereas the floating but rooted hydrophytes is Nymphia, Nelumbium, and Victoria. So here the floating hydrophytes, the plants float on the surface of the water and plant contact with both air and water. So next one is the amphibious hydrophytes. So amphibious hydrophytes means the plants adapted to both aquatic and terrestrial mode of life. So they grow either on the shallow water or muddy soil. So examples for amphibious hydrophytes are Oryza sativa, Marsilia, Sagittaria. So marsh plants, that is the shoot completely exposed to air, but roots are completely buried in the soil. So examples for marsh plants are Cyperus and Typha. So next one is the ecological adaptations of hydrophytes. So here adaptations again classified into morphological, that is external changes, in anatomical internal changes, and physiological, that is physiological activities. So first one is the morphological adaptations of hydrophytes. So generally morphological, so generally the plant which contains root, shoot, and leaves. So first one is a root system. So generally in hydrophytes, the root system is poorly developed and reduced or absent. So here generally in hydrophytes, root system is poorly developed, or it may be reduced, or it may be absent. And if the roots are not required for absorption, generally the main function of the roots is absorption of water from the soil. But here the plants, they are growing in the water, So total plant surface of the plant will absorb water. So entire plant surface can absorb water and minerals. So there is no need for the separate root system to absorb the water. But along with the absorption of water, the another function of the root is attachment to the surface. So it helps in the attachment to the surface. So root caps usually absent, and root pockets or root sheath may develop for protection. In Jessica repens, so two types of roots are seen, that is normal roots and floating roots. So normal roots helps in attachment, whereas the floating roots, they are negatively geotrophic and spongy. So floating roots keep the plant afloat, that is they give the support to these floating these plant, that is helps in the buoyancy of the plant to balance the plant. So here the floating roots are present. So in just here two types of roots are seen, that is normal roots and floating roots. So that is the first one is the root system, that is generally in hydrophytes the root system is poorly developed, or it may be reduced, or it may be absent. If the roots are here the roots are not required for the absorption, and that because so the entire plant surface can absorb the water and minerals. So here the root caps are also absent, and root pockets are seen, or root sheath may develop for protection. So in Josia repens, two types of roots are seen, that is the normal roots and floating roots. So floating roots helps in flow, that is helps to keep the buoyancy, that is to balance, to make balance. So these floating roots will help. So next one is the stem, that is shoot system. So here the stem is also very delicate, usually green in color, and sometimes modified into rhizome or runner. So next one is, so here the root system, that is the stem also very delicate and green in color. That is rhizome, how it is modified into rhizome, or that is the shoot also present along with the surface of the soil, or runners. So when they touch the soil, so from this on the lower surface, so the roots will develop. So these mainly helps in the vegetative propagation. So generally in hydrophytes, vegetative propagation will takes place. So next one is the leaves. So next one is the leaves. So in floating plants, leaves, so generally the modifications in the leaves. So first one is the root, next one is the stem, next one is the leaves. So here in floating plants, leaves are long, circular, green, thin and smooth. And here the upper surface is exposed to air, and the lower surface touch the water. So here the leaves, the generally in hydrophytes, the leaves are in floating plants. So the leaves are long, circular, green and thin and smooth. So the upper surface is exposed to air, and the lower surfaces touch the water. So in lotus, the petiole shows indefinite growth. That is the petiole is very long and always keep the leaf floating. So here in hydrophytes, generally heterophyly also seen in some plants of hydrophytes. That is, heterophyly means that is morphologically different types of leaves are seen. So submerged leaves are, so here two types of leaves on the same plant. So that is submerged leaves and floating leaves. So submerged leaves are linear or ribbon-like, are highly dissected, whereas the floating leaves or aerial leaves are used as usual, and they are circular in shape. So here the submerged leaves are linear, that is ribbon like, it may be dissected or reduced to ribbon like, whereas the floating leaves that are aerial leaves, they are usually circular. So next one is the leaves of free floating hydrophytes are with smooth waxy surface. So generally in hydrophytes, that is waxy surface is present on the leaf. So wax coating which protects the leaves from chemical and physical injuries. And it also prevent the water clogging of stomata. So leaves leaves of eichhornia with swollen and spongy petiole. So in the eichhornia, the petiole is sponge, that is swollen, and it is called a spongy petiole is seen. So this provide buoyancy, that is the balancing in the water. So here the leaf, that is petiole is spongy petiole is seen in eichhornia. So this is also important point to note. So next one is a pollination and dispersal of fruits. So by the help of water. So generally the hydrophytes, they grow in the water. So with the help of water only, here the pollination and dispersal of fruits will take place. And vegetative reproduction, it is the common method of reproduction. So next one is, so these are the morphological characters of the hydrophytes. So morphological characters, so first one is a root system, that is poorly developed root system is seen, and it may be reduced or it may be absent, and roots are not required for the absorption. So because entire plant surface will help in the absorption of water. So generally root caps also absent in hydrophytes, and root pockets or root sheath may be present for the protection. And in Josia, two types of root are seen, that is the normal roots and floating roots. So next one is the stem. Stem is also very delicate and usually green in color and sometimes modified into rhizome or runner. So next one is the leaf. So leaves in the floating plants are long, circular, green in color and with thin, very smooth and thin, and upper surface is exposed to air and the lower surface touch the water. So in lotus, the petiole shows interphase, that is long petiole is seen in lotus, and always keep the leaf floating. So the heterophyll is also seen in some hydrophytes, that is two types of leaves, that is submerged leaves and floating leaves. So the leaves which are present inside the water, submerged leaves, they are linear and ribbon-like. It may be ribbon-like or highly dissected, reduced in size. Whereas a floating leaves, they are aerial, and also usually circular. And leaves of free-floating hydrophytes are with smooth wax. So generally on the free-floating hydrophytes, the leaves are covered with a waxy coating. That is waxy surface is seen on the surface of the leaf. So this mainly helps protect the leaf from chemical and physical injuries. Next one is, it also helps in the preventing the clogging of stomata, water clogging of stomata. So leaves of eichhornia with swollen and spongy petiole. So the swollen petiole or spongy petiole is seen in eichhornia. So it helps in the buoyancy, that is the balancing in the water. So pollination and dispersal of fruit with the help of water, and vegetative propagation is the common method in hydrophytes. So next one is the anatomical adaptations of hydrophytes. So anatomy means, so internal adaptations. So here adaptations means that any change in the organism to survive under some environmental condition. So here the changes in the organism, it may be morphological, that is the external features of the organism, or internal features. So it is called as, here the internal features, it is called as the anatomical adaptation. So the anatomical adaptations in hydrophytes are mainly, so that is generally in the anatomy, when we study the internal structure of any TS of stem or roots, generally in the stem, so it contains outer epidermis. Epidermis is followed by cortex and vascular bundles. So here on the upper and the epidermis also, it is covered with the cuticle. Okay, so generally, so but in hydrophytes, the reduction in the protecting structures and increase in the aeration and the reduction of supporting or mechanical tissue and reduction in vascular tissue. So here the protecting structures, that is epidermis, also helps the protection. Okay, and also the increase in the aeration. So here in the hydrophytes, that is air chambers are seen. And reduction of the supporting or mechanical tissues. So generally mechanical tissue, that is sclerenchyma, mainly helps in the mechanical support. So here the sclerenchyma is sclerenchymatous tissues are also absent or reduced in hydrophytes, and also reduction in the vascular tissue. So vascular tissues mean, that is the xylem and phloem. So the main function of the vascular tissues is mainly helps in the conduction of water and nutrients. So these are reduced in hydrophytes. The reduction in the protecting structures, increase in the aeration, reduction of supporting or mechanical tissue, and reduction in the vascular tissues. So first one is the reduction in the protecting structure. So cuticle. So generally the protecting structures are cuticle. So generally epidermis, which is covered with the thick cuticle. This cuticle mainly helps in the protection. So cuticle totally absent in submerged parts, and in aerial parts it may be present as a thin layer. So here the cuticle is present, it may in a thin layer only. So epidermis is not the protecting layer. So generally in normal plants, so here the epidermis helps in the protection, but here and the epidermis is not the protecting layer, and epidermal cells contain the chloroplast. So generally in the epidermal cells, normal cells, that is in the normal plants, the epidermis, they will not contain the chloroplast, but generally epidermis helps the protection. But here in the hydrophytes, the epidermis contains a chloroplast. So epidermal cells can absorb water and nutrients. So hypodermis, poorly developed, and cells thin walled. So epidermis, it is followed by the hypodermis, that is the cuticle. It is again classified into hypodermis, general cortex, and endodermis. So here the hypodermis, so next to the epidermis, it is called as the hypodermis. So here the hypodermis is also poorly developed, cells thin walled. So next one is the increase in the aeration. So stomata completely absent in submerged parts. So the main function of the stomata is, that is the transpiration, that is the exchange of water. So here the stomata completely absent in submerged parts, and sometimes the vestigial stomata may be present. So here the stomata is present, but there is the non-functional stomata is present. The stomata will not function. So now that is called as a vestigial stomata. So exchange of gases takes place through the cell wall, and in floating plants, stomata confined to the upper epidermis. So parenchyma well developed in submerged plants. So parenchyma means the parenchyma which stores air. So it is called as the parenchyma. So air chambers filled with the respiratory gases and moisture. So here the parenchyma is well developed in hydrophytes. So these are the adaptations, internal adaptation, that is the increasing the aeration. So next one is the reduction of supporting or mechanical tissues. So mechanical tissues absent or poorly developed, and thick-walled sclerenchymatous cells totally absent, and main function of the roots is to anchor in the soil, that is helps the attachment to the soil only. And in nymphia, special type of star-shaped lignified cells, so this is also important. So asterosclerites are seen in nymphia, so are present, and which will provide the mechanical support. So next one is a reduction in the vascular tissue. So vascular elements are poorly developed, and absorption of water and minerals takes place to the cell surface. So vascular elements, that is xylem and phloem, is poorly developed because the main function of the vascular elements is the conduction of water and nutrients. So here the through surface of the plant, that is the surface of the whole organism, will helps in the absorption of water and nutrients. So there is no need for vascular elements. So absorption of water and minerals takes place through the cell surface, and little need of conduction tissue. So next one is a reduction in the vascular, that is xylem is highly reduced. So generally vascular tissues means xylem and phloem. So xylem is reduced, and usually xylem is represented by few tracheids. So generally here the xylem elements like xylem parenchyma, xylem fibers are present, but here only it is represented by the tracheids, vessels, xylem parenchyma, and is xylem parenchyma. These are present, but here only it is represented by the tracheids. So sometimes xylem not at all developed, and phloem usually ill developed, that is not well developed. So sometimes well developed. So vascular bundles arranged towards the center. So secondary growth is absent. In hydrophytes, secondary growth is absent. So next one is a physiological adaptations. So low osmotic concentration of the cell sap, and osmotic concentration is equal or slightly higher to that of the water, and water is absorbed by entire plant surface. So nutrients are absorbed by the entire plant surface, and exchange of gases exchange takes place to the entire plant surface, and oxygen produced by photosynthesis is retained in the air cavities. So here air cavities, they store the oxygen, and this oxygen is utilized when required. So transpiration is absent, and emerged plants and floating plants have the excessive transpiration. And mucilage cells produce the mucilage, and mucilage prevents the decay of plants in the water. So this is about the ecological adaptations of hydrophytes. Is it clear?
Yes, madam.
Okay. So today I will stop here. In next class, we will continue the ecological adaptations of xerophytes. So here the important points to note down is here, that is spongy petiole, which is seen in spongy petiole, it is seen in Eichhornia. So petiole, that is the stalk of the leaf, it is called as a petiole. So here the petiole is spongy and swollen, so it is called as it helps in the buoyancy here. So another point. So this one also, asterosclerate, that is the sclerates are present, that is the lignified cells, so they are star shaped, so they are present in the nymphia. Okay, sir.